Hi, and welcome to this video on shading. So today we're looking at how to turn a circle into a sphere, and we're using a set of pencils. I'm using a HB, a 2B, a 4B, and an 8B. And as you can see, you can really get a nice definition, a nice gradient of tone using these four pencils. And I like using that gradient. So what we're going to do is we're also going to use some blending tools. I've got some kitchen towel, a sponge blender, and a blending stump, and my trusty grey putty rubber. These are brilliant for getting nice, detailed highlights. So we're going to start by drawing a circle. And for this, I'm using a candle. You can use anything just to draw around to create that circle. And I'm going to do it twice because I want to show you the difference. So what we have is a simple shape, which is just a circle. And what we're wanting to do is create that illusion of a three-dimensional sphere. And we're going to do that through using our shading. So we're going to start by just looking at how does this circle become a three-dimensional object? Well, we can see if we draw some contour lines in, and here I'm drawing an ellipse through the center. If I make one of those lines dark, that's going to be in the front, and the back slightly dotted to make it seem as if, that's heading backwards behind us. And then we're going to do the same horizontally. So we're going to draw an ellipse. And again, we are going to do a solid line in the front. Just make that a little bit bold. And then a dotted line in the back, just to show that that's gone backwards. And you can see now that it's already beginning to look less like a shape, just a simple circle, and more like a three-dimensional object. Now, what happens with a three-dimensional object is that what turns it to become three-dimensional is, of course, light. Light is incredibly important, and how light interacts with objects gives us our form. So turning that circle into a sphere. So I'm going to draw a little light source. I'm going to draw a little sun so that I can remember which way the light is hitting my circle to turn it into a sphere. So as you can see, it's going straight down. Now, what you can also do is draw lines out, hitting the edge of your object so that you can see. This will give you a shadow line. It will show you where the light doesn't reach and make, again, that object become grounded, which makes a fabulous effect, making it three-dimensional. And we have various levels of shadow. The cast shadow is the shadow underneath an object where the light doesn't reach. And as you can see, the light bounces back up off objects onto our form. So we can see there's going to be a band on our sphere that's going to be slightly lighter. It's still going to be darker than the lightest lights, but it's going to be lighter than the darker areas around it. And that's the reflected light that we're going to see coming off the ground. So what I'm doing is I'm just drawing in where those bands of light are. So we've got a highlight where the light is actually reflected off the object, and we've got that slowly gradating down into the darker areas, and we've got that little patch of reflected light there being shown as well. So I'm going to start by using my HB, and as you can see, I've got that pencil reasonably flat. I'm getting using the long edge of the graphite to create a shaded effect. If you use the point like you do in writing, it becomes very scratchy. You can't really blend that as much, and it doesn't have the best effect. So using the long edge is a really good idea. And that's why you see a lot of artists sharpen their pencils with a knife and you get a really nice long lead showing. And then I'm going to take my kitchen towel and I'm going to give that a jolly good rub. So I'm blending that in. You can obliterate your highlights at this point. That's fine. What we're doing is we're wanting to layer up. So we're wanting to layer those shadows. So we're building up layer on layer the depth of shading. So I'm still using my HB pencil and I'm just going to do a second layer, but I'm not going to do that very top. I'm just layering it, going further down. So again, I'm just shading really lightly. The whole point of this is to shade lightly and just keep building up. And then I'm going to repeat with my kitchen towel, give it a good rub so that we've got a nice smooth transition going on there. And then I'm going to move up to my 2B. And this one, I'm just going to take that down a level. So again, the form is turning away from the light. So it's gradually getting darker. You'll get a much darker band as it falls away and starts going underneath. And that's the core shadow. That's where we've got that darkest area of shadow. So again, I'm using the flat edge of my graphite pencil and just shading in over the top of my 2 layers of HB pencil shading. Doesn't matter if you can see lines a little bit because we're going to smooth that down with the kitchen towel. So again, and I'm using circular motions because I'm wanting to reflect the object that we've got. So again, I'm going in with my 2B, pressing a little harder there, but again, it's not an issue because we're going to blend away. If I was using my point, we wouldn't be able to blend that as easily. And that's when it tends to get a little lost and looks a little fake as such. So we're now going to again blend with our kitchen towel and really making it so that those transitions into the dark are very gradual. And that's why layering up is really good and putting layer on top of layer. So I'm now coming in with my 4B and I'm looking at where that core shadow is. So where the actual form turns away from the light properly. So that light is not touching this particular area of the sphere. And so we're wanting to, again, shade over that, going slightly lighter over that reflected light area because I'm wanting that to be a little lighter. But although the light is shining on there, it's not as dark, it's not as light as the areas that are facing the light. And now I'm using my sponge because it's nicer with those softer graphite leads. To the sponge kind of works it a little bit better, I find. So again, I'm moving it up. I want to have a nice smooth transition. So I'm building that layer up. Doesn't matter if you go over the edges. That's the whole point of a rubber. We can erase those and make that a smoother line again. So I've now got my 8B. So this is the darkest pencil I've got. So I'm just doing around the bottom where that cast shadow is, where there's no light being reflected up, and around that core shadow where, again, the reflected light isn't reaching and the actual light isn't touching that area of shadow either. So we're beginning to get a feel of something that's really turning round. And again, I'm using my sponge and giving that a jolly good rub to smooth that and smoosh it up a bit. And then I'm using my putty rubber just to gently take those bits where I've gone over the edge a little bit, just smooth that down to give a nice smooth edge because it is an object. I want this to be three-dimensional. Three-dimensional things don't tend to blend out into their background. So I want to have a nice edge to it. And then I'm using my paper stump because this gives a more precise shading. So this is a really good blender if you want something a little bit more precise because it takes the graphite and moves it almost like a pencil, but obviously there's no graphite or lead in there. So it gives a really nice precision. So that's what I'm using there. And it's good around the edges as well because I've just rubbed those out. So I don't really want to blend over the edge again. So again, I'm smoothing and getting that transition of those shadows, those darks into the midtones, and then that reflected light. And then I'm going back in with my 8B again. So just to reiterate, the cast shadow, which is the bit on the surface of the table or place where the object is sitting, and I'm just making sure that that's the darkest area. There's no light hitting that. So we want that to be quite dark. And then I'm lightly shading, again, keeping that pencil flattish. So we've got a nice gradient. And I'm just taking that shadow out, being lighter as we go. And I'm going to use my blending tools to pull that shadow further out. I don't want too much pigment on the paper there. I want to make it lighter, but I want to, and that'll create the realistic feel. So I'm just using my kitchen towel there, and I'm just pulling that led that graphite out to create that shadow. So the shadow is getting lighter the further away it is from the object. And as you can see with the 8B, you really get an ability to pull that shadow out because it's really soft. And then I'm taking my putty rubber and I'm just putting in that highlight at the top. So, you know, where we said it didn't matter if we blended over the highlight, that's because we've got our putty rubber and we're just bringing that in. And there you can see how a sphere can emerge from a flat form, a circle, and all of a sudden we don't look like a flat shape anymore. We are now a circular form.